Something strange is happening right now in the NFL media landscape, and most people are only catching fragments of it. A fired head coach, the one who finished dead last in anonymous player rankings, the one who sat a generational quarterback talent for 11 weeks while the season collapsed around everyone, the one who made the single most criticized in-game decision of the entire 2025 season, is currently making the rounds on podcasts and interview shows with a very specific goal in mind. Kevin Stefanski is not just doing press appearances. He is running a full-scale reputation rehabilitation campaign designed to rewrite a history that millions of football fans watched unfold in real time. The composure is calculated. The language is lawyerly. The narrative being constructed underneath every carefully chosen word is one where he did everything right, and the chaos was somehow everyone else's fault. The audacity of attempting this particular cleanup after what happened in Cleveland has turned a routine coaching firing story into something that has the entire football world paying attention. What you're about to hear is the full picture. Every layer, every receipt, every moment the internet will never let him forget. In the weeks following his dismissal from the Cleveland Browns, Kevin Stefanski began appearing on podcasts, radio shows, and media platforms with a consistency that suggested careful coordination rather than spontaneous availability. The timing was deliberate. The messaging was uniform. The image being projected was that of a composed, thoughtful, professionally mature former head coach who understood the business of football and harbored no resentment toward anyone involved in the decision to end his tenure. On the surface, every answer sounded reasonable. He spoke about lessons learned. He referenced the reality that NFL coaching positions are not lifetime appointments. He expressed appreciation for the professional courtesy of being informed before the final game rather than after. He said multiple times that he held no ill will toward the organization and respected their decision to move in a different direction. The words themselves were perfectly calibrated for the moment. Gracious without being weak. Reflective without being defensive. Exactly what you would expect from a media-trained professional navigating an uncomfortable situation with maximum damage control in mind. And if you only listen, coaching tenures end. Results matter. The NFL is unforgiving. A man accepting that reality without public bitterness deserves some measure of respect for his composure. But the people who watched the Cleveland Browns season with their eyes open are not absorbing these interviews without context. They remember what happened. They remember every decision, every sideline moment, every press conference where the language about Shedeur Sanders felt slightly off. They remember the body language that never quite matched the words. They remember the competition framing that kept a Pro Bowl caliber rookie quarterback glued to the bench for nearly 3 months while Joe Flacco started, and the wins refused to materialize. The podcast tour is not just a coach doing media appearances. The podcast tour is a deliberate attempt to construct an alternative version of events in which Kevin Stefanski was always supportive, always professional, always the reasonable man caught in impossible circumstances beyond his control. A version where the problems that ended his tenure were external to his decision-making rather than directly caused by it. A version where the chaos surrounding Shedeur Sanders was somehow someone else's fault. And that version is not going to survive contact with reality because the internet archives everything. Every clip from every game is preserved. Every sideline camera angle is accessible. Every press conference answer is searchable. The receipts exist in high definition, and they tell a story that directly contradicts the composed narrative currently being distributed across sports media platforms. The people conducting these interviews are not pushing back hard enough. That is the frustrating part for fans who feel like they are watching a reputation laundering operation happen in real time. The questions are soft. The follow-ups are gentle. The environment is designed to let Stefanski present his preferred version of events without meaningful challenge from anyone in the room. But social media is not a controlled environment. Comment sections are not friendly territory for revisionist history. And the football community that spent an entire season watching Stefanski's decisions pile up into a pattern of mismanagement is not interested in accepting a cleaned-up version of what everyone witnessed together. The response to the podcast tour has been immediate and unforgiving. Clips from the interviews get posted. Comments flood in within minutes. The ratio is brutal. People are sharing side-by-side comparisons of what Stefanski says in these interviews versus what actually happened on game days. The disconnect between the composed audio and the documented video evidence is impossible to ignore once you start looking. What makes this particular rehabilitation attempt so audacious is the assumption that it might actually work. That enough time and enough softball interviews and enough carefully worded responses might eventually overwrite the collective memory of an entire fan base. That the narrative can be shifted through repetition and presentation rather than through any actual accountability for what went wrong. Kevin Stefanski seems to believe that if he just keeps saying the right things in the right tone with the right posture, people will eventually forget the 2-point conversion play. They will forget the 11 weeks of bench warming. They will forget the report card that ranked him last among all 32 head coaches in the league. They will forget the body language and the friction and the pattern that multiple reporters documented throughout the season. He seems to believe the podcast tour can fix this. And that belief, that fundamental misreading of how the modern football audience processes and retains information, might be the most revealing thing about his entire approach to the situation. The old playbook of controlling the narrative through traditional media appearances does not work anymore. The receipts are everywhere. The clips travel faster than the spin, and the audience remembers everything. The podcast tour is not rehabilitation. It is evidence of how deeply Stefanski misunderstands what actually went wrong. If you want to understand why the internet refuses to let Kevin Stefanski rewrite his Cleveland legacy, you need to understand one specific play. One moment that crystallized everything wrong about his tenure into 60 seconds of nationally televised football that will live in Cleveland sports infamy for decades. The 2-point conversion play. The context matters because the context is what makes the decision so indefensible. Shedeur Sanders was in rhythm, not just playing competently, not just managing the game, but actually locked in at a level that franchise quarterbacks reach when everything clicks. The throws were precise. The reads were fast. The confidence was visible in every movement, every cadence, every split-second decision that separated him from the veteran he had been sitting behind for months. This was the moment. Every coach who has ever developed a young quarterback understands what that moment looks like when it arrives. The moment where the talent stops being potential and starts being production. The moment where you stop protecting the young player and start building around him because he has demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that he can handle the weight. Shedeur Sanders was having that moment in a game that mattered. And Kevin Stefanski, standing on the sideline with full authority over the play calling, made a decision that disrupted everything. The 2-point conversion call was not designed to maximize what Sanders was doing. It was designed to control the situation in a way that prioritized the system over the player. The execution reflected that priority. The play was structured in a way that pulled Sanders out of the flow he had built, inserted unnecessary complexity at exactly the wrong moment, and signaled to everyone on the field that the head coach did not fully trust the quarterback to make the play happen on his own. The result was predictable to anyone watching with football understanding. The play collapsed. The momentum evaporated. The opportunity that Sanders had been building toward through an entire half of elite performance was gone in an instant. Not because Sanders failed, not because the defense made an extraordinary play, because the coaching decision itself was a failure at the most fundamental level of quarterback management. The camera captured Stefanski's face in the aftermath. The expression was not confusion. It was not surprise. It was the look of a man who understood immediately that his own decision had just detonated in his hands and there was no way to undo it. The sideline energy shifted. The team felt it. The stadium felt it. The millions watching from home felt it viscerally in real time. Social media exploded within seconds. The takes were uniform across every platform. This was not a close call that reasonable people could disagree about. This was a coaching mistake so clear and so damaging that the football community reached consensus almost instantly. Stefanski had disrupted his young quarterback at the worst possible moment, and the game reflected the cost immediately. The analysts broke it down in the hours afterward. The film study confirmed what everyone had felt watching live. The play call was wrong. The timing was wrong. The The decision-making process that led to that call reflected a head coach who had never fully committed to the player standing in his quarterback room. But here is what makes the two-point conversion so significant beyond the immediate game impact. It was not an isolated moment. It was a crystallization of a pattern that had been visible all season long to anyone paying attention. The friction between Stefanski and Sanders had been documented by multiple reporters. The body language had been analyzed in countless segments. The 11 weeks of Sanders sitting behind Joe Flacco, while the team struggled, had raised questions that Stefanski never answered convincingly. The two-point conversion was not an aberration. It was evidence. Evidence that the head coach of the Cleveland Browns was more invested in maintaining control over his offensive system than in developing the generational talent sitting in his quarterback room. Evidence that the competition framing that kept Sanders on the bench was not about evaluation, but about ego. Evidence that Stefanski would rather disrupt a young quarterback's rhythm than admit that getting out of the way might be the best coaching decision available. That play is now archived permanently. It exists in highlight reels and low-light compilations and analytical breakdowns that will surface every single time Kevin Stefanski's name appears in a football conversation. The podcast tour cannot erase it. The composed interviews cannot explain it away. The carefully constructed narrative of supportive coaching collapses the moment anyone pulls up the footage and watches what actually happened. When Stefanski sits across from a podcast host and says that he was always in Shedeur Sanders' corner, the two-point conversion play calls him a liar without saying a word. The evidence contradicts the testimony. The footage refutes the framing. And the football community that watched it happen is not experiencing collective amnesia just because the fired coach wants to move forward with a clean slate. The two-point conversion is the receipt that will never expire. And the internet has made absolutely sure that Kevin Stefanski will never be allowed to forget it. The timing of Kevin Stefanski's firing tells a story that his carefully worded interviews are desperately trying to obscure. Pay attention to the timeline, because the timeline reveals everything about where the power in that building had shifted and what it had shifted toward. Stefanski was informed on a Thursday, not the Thursday after the season concluded, not during the off-season evaluation period when coaching changes typically get finalized. The Thursday before the final game of the regular season, 4 days before the last whistle of his tenure would blow. 4 days during which he would have to walk into a facility where everyone knew his fate, coach a football game as a lame duck, manage a locker room that understood the situation completely, and pretend in front of cameras that everything was proceeding normally. In his interviews, Stefanski has framed this timing as an act of professional courtesy. He expressed appreciation for being told early enough to prepare his family for the transition. He spoke about the organization giving him time to process the decision rather than springing it on him after the final game concluded. The words suggested gratitude. The posture suggested mature acceptance. But sit with the reality of that timeline for more than a moment, and the professional courtesy framing starts to dissolve. Organizations do not fire head coaches before the final game of the season unless the decision has already been made with absolute certainty, and the clock is running on something more urgent than normal off-season timelines. The Cleveland Browns told Kevin Stefanski he was finished before the season was technically complete, because waiting even one more week would have created complications they were not willing to absorb. The decision was final. The direction was set. The organizational pivot had already begun, and Stefanski's presence was now an obstacle to the next chapter rather than a necessary component of closing out the current one. What was the urgency? What could not wait 7 more days for the season to end naturally before the coaching change got communicated officially? The answer is sitting in the quarterback room in a Cleveland Browns jersey with a Pro Bowl invitation already secured. Shedeur Sanders. The moment the organization committed fully to Sanders as their franchise quarterback, the math changed completely. Stefanski's relationship with Sanders had been visibly strained for months. The body language was documented. The friction was reported by multiple outlets. The two-point conversion play had happened on national television and confirmed what everyone suspected about the disconnect between the head coach and the young quarterback. Keeping Stefanski around for the offseason would have meant navigating a power struggle that neither side could win cleanly. The organization would have been forced to manage competing narratives, conflicting visions for the offense, and the reality that their franchise quarterback and their head coach were fundamentally misaligned on how to build something sustainable together. The Thursday notification was not courtesy. It was clarity. It was the organization communicating as directly as possible that the Sanders era had begun, and anyone who could not fully commit to that era needed to start planning their exit immediately. Stefanski has been careful in interviews not to make this connection explicitly. He talks around it. He references the results business and the lack of lifetime appointments. He uses language that sounds philosophical and detached from the specific interpersonal dynamics that actually drove the decision. But the energy shifts when the topic gets close to Sanders. The pauses get slightly longer. The qualifiers multiply. The implication lives underneath every word even when he refuses to say it directly. Once Shedeur Sanders became the guy, Kevin Stefanski became the problem. And the Cleveland Browns, to their organizational credit, recognized that reality quickly enough to act on it before the situation calcified into something even messier. The firing before the final game was a signal to everyone paying attention. It told Sanders that the franchise was choosing him over the established coach. It told the incoming coaching candidates that the quarterback situation was not up for debate. It told the football world that Cleveland had learned from its mistakes and was not going to let a misaligned coaching situation derail a generational talent in his second year. And it told Kevin Stefanski that his time was up in a way that no amount of podcast touring can reframe into something positive. You were not extended the courtesy of finishing your tenure with dignity. You were informed that your presence had become an obstacle, and the organization was no longer willing to accommodate that obstacle, even for the remaining days of a season that was already lost. The timeline tells the truth, even when the interviews try to obscure it. Stefanski was not given professional courtesy. Stefanski was given a clear exit signal designed to minimize his influence over the transition that was already underway. The distinction matters because it reflects how the organization actually viewed his tenure in the final analysis. When the choice became Stefanski or Sanders, Cleveland chose Sanders without hesitation. And they communicated that choice before the season ended because waiting even one more week would have sent the wrong message to the quarterback they were betting their future on. The NFL Combine is supposed to be a celebration of football's future. Scouts evaluating talent, coaches meeting prospects, executives planning draft strategies. The next generation of stars running drills and answering questions while the entire league watches from the stands. Indianapolis becomes the center of the football universe for 1 week every year, and the atmosphere is typically professional, forward-looking, and optimistic. It is not typically a venue for public accountability moments involving recently fired head coaches. But the NFL does not always follow the script. And what happened when Kevin Stefanski appeared at the 2025 Combine was the kind of spontaneous public reckoning that no podcast tour can prepare you for. The booing started immediately, not the scattered grumbling of a few disgruntled fans in a corner of the building, not the half-hearted disapproval that can be written off as ambient crowd noise. This was unified, organized, throated, and sustained. The sound filled the space in a way that demanded acknowledgement. People turned to see what was happening. Cameras captured the moment. Social media distributed it within minutes. Kevin Stefanski walked into an NFL event and got booed like a villain entering the arena at a wrestling show. The volume was unmistakable. The message was clear, and there was nowhere to hide from either. What made this moment so significant was the composition of the audience delivering the verdict. The Combine is not attended by casual observers who catch a few games on red zone and form opinions based on headlines. The people in that building are football people. Hardcore fans who understand the nuances of play calling and quarterback development and coaching decisions that casual viewers might miss entirely. These are people who watched the 2-point conversion play and understood immediately what went wrong. People who tracked the 11 weeks of Shedeur Sanders sitting behind Joe Flacco and recognized the wasted development time. People who saw the body language on the sideline and read the reports about friction in the quarterback room. People who knew exactly what Kevin Stefanski's tenure had looked like from the inside because they had been paying closer attention than anyone else in the football audience. When those people boo you at the Combine, It is not random noise. It is a verdict from the most informed segment of the fan base delivered in the most public possible setting. It is the football community telling you directly that your podcast tour is not working, your reputation rehabilitation is not landing, and the narrative you are trying to construct does not match the reality that everyone witnessed together. The booing at Indianapolis was karma arriving on schedule. Not quietly, not privately, not in a form that could be managed or spun or explained away in the next interview. Karma walked into the building, sat down next to Kevin Stefanski at a scouting event, and roared loud enough for everyone to hear. The footage circulated everywhere within hours. Sports media covered it. Podcasts discussed it. Social media turned it into content that will resurface every time Stefanski's name appears in a football conversation for years to come. The Combine moment became part of the permanent record in a way that no amount of composed interviews can overwrite. What does it feel like to experience that? To walk into a professional setting expecting the normal rhythms of NFL business and instead encountering the collective frustration of an entire fan base condensed into one sustained wall of sound? Stefanski's face in the footage tells the story. This was not expected. This was not prepared for. The carefully constructed media presence did not have a response ready for this particular form of feedback. The Combine booing also revealed something important about the broader football community's response to Stefanski's post-firing behavior. People are not just upset about what happened in Cleveland. They are upset about the attempt to pretend it happened differently. The podcast tour aggravated the situation rather than improving it because it suggested that Stefanski believed he could simply talk his way out of accountability. The booing was the response to that belief. It was the football community saying that the receipts exist, the footage is archived, the pattern is documented, and no amount of careful language is going to make anyone forget what they watched happen over the course of an entire season. Kevin Stefanski walked out of that combine carrying something he did not walk in with: the public confirmation that his reputation rehabilitation had failed. The composed interviews might continue. The podcast appearances might stack up. The carefully worded responses might get distributed across media platforms. But Indianapolis established something that cannot be undone. The football community has rendered its judgment, and the judgment was delivered loud enough for the whole league to hear. Every year, the NFL Players Association conducts anonymous surveys asking players to evaluate their head coaches. The results get compiled into report cards that rank all 32 coaches based on feedback from the people who work with them every single day. Practice sessions, meeting rooms, game day sidelines, halftime adjustments. The players see everything, and the anonymity of the survey allows them to say what they actually think without worrying about professional consequences. The 2025 report card ranked Kevin Stefanski dead last, 32nd out of 32 head coaches. A grade of C-, the absolute bottom of the list with no ambiguity and no room for interpretation. This was not a middling review that could be explained away by a difficult season. This was not a grade that fell within the range of normal coaching variance. This was the comprehensive, democratically sourced, anonymously submitted judgment of the players who experienced Stefanski's coaching environment firsthand. And their judgment was that he was the worst head coach in the entire league. Think about what that means for a moment. There are coaches in the NFL managing rebuilding teams with no talent on the roster. There are coaches navigating organizational dysfunction that makes their jobs nearly impossible. There are coaches who finished with worse records than Cleveland, worse point differentials, worse outcomes by any objective competitive measure. And the players who worked with those coaches still graded them higher than the players who worked with Kevin Stefanski. The grade was not about wins and losses. The grade was about the environment. The communication, the trust, the leadership, the daily experience of being coached by this particular man in this particular building. And the players who lived that experience said it was the worst in the league. The report card results destroy the podcast tour narrative completely. Stefanski has been presenting himself as a supportive, professional coach who maintained positive relationships throughout his tenure despite the disappointing results. But the people who were actually in the room with him, who experienced his coaching style without the filter of press conference language, who saw how he operated when the cameras were not rolling, gave him a C- and ranked him below every other head coach in professional football. You cannot spin that. You cannot explain it away with careful language. The anonymity of the survey means the feedback was honest in a way that public statements almost never are. Players said what they actually felt because there was no professional risk in doing so. And what they said was damning. The locker room had turned. Not recently, not gradually, but completely and decisively. The players did not trust their head coach. They did not respect his leadership. They did not feel supported or developed or positioned to succeed by the man responsible for creating their professional environment. And they communicated that judgment through the most direct channel available to them. When a locker room turns on a head coach to this degree, the question is never whether the firing is coming. The question is only how long the organization will wait before acting on what everyone inside the building already knows. Cleveland answered that question the Thursday before the final game. The report card confirmed that the decision was the right one. The timing of the report card release also matters. It came out during the same stretch when Stefanski was making his podcast rounds and constructing his alternative narrative. The contrast was impossible to miss. On one platform, a composed former coach speaking carefully about lessons learned and professional courtesy. On another platform, documented evidence that the people who worked with him daily considered him the worst head coach in the league. The football community noticed the contradiction immediately. Social media highlighted it relentlessly. The composed interviews started playing differently once everyone understood that the C- existed. The careful language sounded less like mature acceptance and more like desperate damage control. The professional posture looked less like dignity and more like performance. The report card is the receipt that matters most because it comes from inside the building, not from fans who watched on television, not from analysts who broke down film, not from reporters who covered the team from the outside, from the players themselves. The men who put on Cleveland Browns jerseys every week and tried to win football games under Kevin Stefanski's leadership. They ranked him last. And that ranking will follow him for the rest of his career, regardless of how many podcasts he appears on or how carefully he chooses his words in interviews. The NFLPA report card cannot be dismissed as media bias or fan frustration or organizational scapegoating. It is the documented judgment of the professionals who experienced Kevin Stefanski's coaching environment from the inside. And their judgment was that it was the worst in the entire National Football League. No amount of rehabilitation can undo that. The grade is permanent. The ranking is public. And the football world will reference it every time Stefanski's name comes up in any coaching conversation for years to come. Let something be clear before this goes any further. Shedeur Sanders does not need anyone to protect him. Shedeur Sanders is going to be absolutely fine. The Pro Bowl selection in his rookie year confirmed what the draft evaluators saw when they graded him as a first-round talent available at a fifth-round salary. The skill set is real. The ceiling is extraordinary. The future is bright regardless of what happened during his first season in Cleveland. The new head coach has gone on record about Sanders' elite playmaking ability. The offensive line has been upgraded through both free agency and the draft. The franchise has finally organized itself around maximizing his potential rather than managing his development through artificial competition frameworks. The Saudi PIF Global Partnership made him one of the most commercially powerful names in professional sports before his second season even begins. Shedeur Sanders is fine. He does not need validation from retrospective analysis or protection from podcast tour attempting to rewrite history. His trajectory is set and his success is inevitable. But the reason people remain frustrated about what Kevin Stefanski did extends beyond whether Sanders survived the experience. The frustration is about what the experience cost, the lost development time that cannot be recovered, the wasted weeks that could have been spent building rather than managing. Sanders sat on the bench for 11 weeks while Joe Flacco started. 11 weeks of a rookie quarterback's first professional season spent watching from the sideline while a veteran managed games that were slipping away anyway. 11 weeks of development time that disappeared into a competition framework that everyone paying attention recognized as artificial from the beginning. The stated rationale was evaluation. The organization needed to see what they had. The coaching staff wanted to make sure Sanders was ready before exposing him to the full pressure of starting in the NFL. The explanations sounded reasonable if you accepted them at face value. but the results told a different story. Once Sanders finally got the starting job, he played well enough to make the Pro Bowl despite limited preparation time with the first-team offense. The transition was not catastrophic. The learning curve was not insurmountable. The readiness that supposedly required 11 weeks of evaluation was apparently present the entire time. What were those 11 weeks actually about? The pattern suggests control. Stefanski maintaining authority over the quarterback room by managing the competition rather than committing to development. Stefanski protecting his system by limiting the variables rather than adapting to the extraordinary talent available. Stefanski prioritizing his own comfort over the needs of the player, who was clearly the future of the franchise. 23 sacks. Sanders absorbed 23 sacks during his limited starting opportunities. The offensive line was a problem that Stefanski had multiple seasons to address and never solved. The protection issues, the play call reflected the same prioritization of control over development that characterized the entire season. Even when Sanders was succeeding, even when the momentum was building, and the performance was reaching elite levels, Stefanski could not resist inserting himself into the equation in ways that undermined what the young quarterback was doing. The pattern is not speculation. The pattern is documented across an entire season of decisions that consistently prioritize the coach's control over the player's development. And here is where the history becomes relevant beyond Cleveland. Baker Mayfield was another talented, confident quarterback who spent time in Cleveland managing a coaching relationship that never reached the level of genuine trust required for franchise quarterback development. The friction was documented. The tension was reported. The relationship never quite clicked the way it needed to for either party to reach their full potential. Mayfield left Cleveland and eventually flourished with the Los Angeles Rams under a head coach who trusted him completely and built a system around his strengths. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. The same player who struggled in Cleveland became one of the better quarterbacks in football the moment he entered a different coaching environment. One quarterback leaving Cleveland and immediately improving could be circumstantial. Two quarterbacks following the same pattern becomes a conversation that Kevin Stefanski cannot avoid no matter how many podcasts he appears on. The cost of Stefanski's tenure was not measured in wins and losses alone. It was measured in development time stolen from young quarterbacks who deserved better. In unnecessary sacks absorbed behind a line that was never properly addressed. In rhythm disrupted and momentum killed and potential managed rather than maximized. Sanders survived. Mayfield survived. But surviving is not the same as thriving. And the difference between those outcomes often comes down to whether the head coach trusted the talent enough to get out of the way. Kevin Stefanski's record on that question is now documented twice over. And the football world will be watching very closely to see if the pattern continues in his next opportunity. Kevin Stefanski has landed a new job. The Atlanta Falcons hired him as their offensive coordinator, placing him in direct influence over another young, talented quarterback in Michael Penix Jr. The questions that Cleveland fans wish someone had asked louder before the 2025 season are now being asked by Falcons fans who have watched this entire saga unfold with growing anxiety about what they might be inheriting. Does Stefanski trust young quarterbacks? Does he get out of the way when the talent exceeds his system? Does he prioritize development over control when the two conflict? Cleveland provided documented answers. Atlanta will now discover whether those answers represent a pattern or an aberration. Reports suggest the Falcons' ownership is aware of the friction points that define the Cleveland tenure. The patience for a repeat is described as essentially non-existent. Stefanski has been given one more chance to demonstrate that what happened with Shedeur Sanders was situational rather than character-driven. The NFL is watching. Atlanta is watching. Michael Penix Jr. is about to find out which version of Kevin Stefanski walks into those offensive coordinator meetings every morning. The internet still has all the receipts, and receipts do not expire.